Hello and welcome to Branford Voices. I'm Tracy Everson. Today we are focusing on the town's finances with perspectives from two men who have spent 27 years working together to make Branford fiscally strong and resilient. Jim Finch is retiring this year after having served as Branford's finance director for 25 years. He was hired by former First Selectman Unc DeRoss in 1998. And Joe served 12 years as Branford's finance director, then went to work for the state. Do I have that right, Joe? As the Deputy Commissioner of Revenue Services?
That correct.
And is now retired after serving 5 years as the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Financial Officer of Connecticut Hospice right here in Branford. And Joe was appointed to the Board of Finance in 1996. So Joe was in that position, and in came Jim Finch in 1998 as the second in command at the finance department. Can you take us back? You were the assistant director, weren't you?
No, actually...
You came in as the director.
Yeah,
you
actually,
did.
Actually, ironically, with all the responsibilities of the finance department, I found I was one of the few directors that did not have an assistant. So in 1998, the finance department was absent Catherine's position, the assistant finance director, and she is actually the first assistant finance director Branford's had.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very different days. And Joe was just telling me that he was one of the first to bring computers to Branford Town Hall.
Yeah, actually, I was the first finance director hired in 1977 by John Sliney, who was the first selectman at the time. So I served for with John Sliney, then Peter Blondie, and then Judy Gott. And then I went up to the state of Connecticut in 1992. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, in 1983, we brought in computers into Town Hall, and John DiCarlo, who was an officer at the police department at the time, brought in computers over to the police department. So we worked hand in hand, but we automated all of the town books, finances onto computers over several years.
Wow.
So
did that make it easier when you came in, Jim?
Yeah.
I can't imagine being a finance director before computers. What a job.
Yeah, I mean, there's a slight age gap, so I've always had computers working in a finance office, but yeah, absolutely. It would have been vastly more difficult. I think when I started, I think it might have been the AS400, the IBM. Was that Peter Ugrit that?
Yeah, we had graduated from an IBM 36 to 400. That was the next generation. And Peter Ugrit was instrumental in bringing those to the table.
And Peter was on the police commission, or he may still be actually. So.
No, he's no longer.
Oh, he isn't?
Okay,
all right, but he was. Yeah. He stayed involved in government. Yeah.
Yes, he did. So one of the things, there are plaques on many of our buildings in town. I don't know if you've gone around and taken pictures of all the ones that have your name on it, Jim. But a few of the projects, I saw you recently this summer at the ribbon cutting for the new artificial turf field at Walsh Intermediate School. Walsh Intermediate School rebuilding, renovations, the community house and the senior center, the Branford Fire Department, the Daniel Cosgrove Animal Shelter. You have kind of a long list of projects that you helped to work the numbers out so the town would be able to do it.
Well, at the risk of sounding like a wise guy, I'm glad you actually mentioned that because actually my name's not on any of the plaques.
It's not?
No.
What? I thought it was on the
finance department
community.
has traditionally been in the background supporting.
I thought
things.
you were. I thought you were on the
I've seen that in
community
other
house.
I've seen that in other towns, but
Well, that was a misstep on my part and the
and Joe's
town's.
not either. So I mean,
but we could always add Jim's name if we wanted to. But,
You could name
We should.
You could rename the Coastal Resiliency Fund or something.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Yes.
that was Jim's
Yes.
baby.
Yep. Yeah.
But that's all right. It's
Do
okay.
any of those projects stand out to you?
To me, I think they're, it's almost, this may sound corny, it's almost like asking someone to pick their favorite child, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're all special in their own ways, right?
Right.
And so I would say from just the scale of it, I think the Walsh project was certainly an important project. Then the firehouse I think was important as well, and I think it's again I think it's hard to pick a favorite. I think what typically they all had their own merits, and I think they've all improved the lives of the citizens in different ways, whether it's public safety, recreation, certainly education. I know that with the Walsh project, there was a lot of hand-wringing about that open classroom concept. And so I think from that perspective, I think it was important. And Walsh also was, probably more so than the other schools, really a community asset because they had the pool there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes.
so probably from a, impact on citizens in terms of the kids going in and out of there, probably Walsh. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. How about for you, Joe?
Well, I was thinking about some of the projects. When I first came into town, there was a capital improvements program going on, and actually they purchased the Bodner property, which at the time was thought to be a spot for a new high school. But Veterans Park is actually on that property now, and we were also finalizing the quarry, Stony Creek Quarry purchase, which was actually very innovative because it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's about 400 acres, and 50 of the acres was actually paid for by local funds. And one of the reasons was in order to be able to maintain the active quarry in there. Mm-hmm. So the 350 or 300, three-quarters of the property was purchased through state and federal grants, and the other piece of it was sectioned off and paid for strictly by local funds. And that's a huge piece of property. But at the time, we were also, acquiring other open space. So that was a big accomplishment. Was not only a quarry property, the Pisgah Brook property, Beacon Hill. At the same time, we were renovating Sliney School back in 78,
Oh,
79. So that was the first renovation,
Right.
actually. And it was very
Yeah.
small. Jim would love this. It was like $1,650,000 or something.
Wow.
All right.
You can barely do anything for that
so,
today.
Right.
And we were also involved with a lot of sewer construction, and
Oh,
not
right.
only an
Yes.
expansion of the treatment plant, the initial treatment, actually 2 or 3 variations and expansions of the treatment plant, as well as adding trunk lines all over town. So that was a big part. There was a lot of construction going on at the time. Also, during the Judy Gott days, we renovated the Cherry Hill School, and that became the first senior center.
Right.
But along the way, there was multiple. Every year there was something coming up: schools, school projects, public works projects. So again, the balance, as Jim, and I had always looked at was working with the debt model and the budgets and how do you handle the expenditures and how can you get grants in order to minimize the impact on the citizens. But
Right.
again, all the parties, both sides of the aisle were working together in order to really do the common good, I think, for the town. So
Yeah.
that's always been a good.
I think that's the way that we all kind of try to approach it.
Right, right.
Not put partisan politics aside and what is best in the town's interest.
Yeah.
So Branford continues to enjoy a AAA bond rating, reflecting the strong fiscal health and low borrowing risk due to guaranteed stability. So for the layman, explain what that means and how you achieve that.
Okay, well, maybe I'll start with what it means. So I think to put it in a consumer model, anyone who's applied for a loan usually gets a report from the credit bureau. And most lenders will use a model called risk-based lending. And so if you have a lower score, which translates into a higher risk, your rate is higher than, say, someone with a high credit score. So with Branford's AAA with Standard & Poor's, that would be akin to, let's just say, an 800 credit score on a personal note. And the rating agencies, their models have changed somewhat over the years, but they really look at a couple key areas. They look at your demographics. They look at your balance sheet. How are you managing your liabilities? What's your fund balance, et cetera. And then they also will look at what kind of debts you have. And we talked a little bit about the bonding for all these projects, but the other thing they look at is other types of debt. So, for example, if you're not funding your pension plan, that's seen as a debt, because you have to make those payments eventually so that you can honor your commitment to retirees. More recently, there was the other post-employment benefits. Other really distinguishes itself from pensions, so those would be, in Branford's case, retiree medical costs. So they look at that. They look at what's going on in your economy. Is your population growing or is it shrinking? Is your grand list growing or is it shrinking? And then within that, they'll look at certain elements like building permits, et cetera. Getting back to the debt, they'll say, well, what is your debt as a percent of your budget, for example, which would, so there are elements of the way consumer finance works, but, with the town, they're looking at a lot of different aspects. And are you actually, putting money into your infrastructure? Because obviously,
Right.
if you neglect your infrastructure, you may look healthy in an audit report, but lurking in the background is all those buildings falling apart, unpaved roads, and vehicles and fire trucks that need to be replaced. So,
Right. Yes.
Yeah, another thing they do look at is financial management. So they look at the stability in the finance office and they look at the government itself. So that they see that stability as an important factor as well.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking about it earlier, Tracy, when you were talking about our collective years with Branford. That is one of our slides in our bond rating presentation.
Oh, really?
How many years that I've been here,
Right.
how many years that Joe's been on the Board of Finance. So
Right.
it does show a stability in Branford, which I think also helps us indirectly when we're trying to attract employees too.
Right.
They want to see, what's sort of the leadership. So if you want to work at a finance office, you would look at the Board of Finance and you look at the finance office. And I think that's also a selling point there too, although not directly, translating into a credit score, but they do look at the rating agencies do look at the stability. So,
Right. Yes. So the 2024 revaluation in property taxes, we saw the huge shift in the real estate market during and following the pandemic, increasing home values significantly in the last 5 years. So one of the phrases is that I enjoy hearing from Jim Finch is glide paths. And that's one thing that you have kind of taken into consideration, but also planning for potential cuts, right? Setting aside, earmarking the $3 million this year of the undesignated fund in case the schools were left short. So talk about those.
well, I think part of that was really looking at what does the future look like, and because we are in such uncertain political times, what are some of the risks? So, for example, when the new administration took office in Washington, one of the first things they did was send a one-page memo out, basically cutting all government spending except foreign aid or something like that. And so governments across the country were spending all day trying to figure out what that meant. And so in Branford's case, I think you have to look at, okay, well, where is our exposure? And a lot of the exposure was more on the school side with some of their grants. So there's grants like with their Title I schools, their food programs, for example. Even to some extent, the bus contract with Zoom is reliant on elements of federal funding. So the Board of Finance last February, going into the budget season, looking at things to do in advance of the reval, we're looking at some ways to kind of insulate ourselves in advance. And I think also there was like $1 million for a medical reserve. I think $400,000 for the library, and there was some other engineering projects that were done for that. I think another area that may come up later that we've identified as a liability, and we've tried to be proactive, although not necessarily in response to that OPM memo from Washington, although later we found out, as you know, from your coastal vulnerability working group, is that the BRIC funding went away. So, so for communities that need to finance resilient projects, treatment plant, and others, they have to sort of incorporate that into their capital planning, and so that's something that's important. And actually, we boosted the Coastal Resiliency Fund that year, put additional $750,000, so we could kind of back off a little bit during the reval year, because I think, as Joe has emphasized, and we've all have emphasized, is we really wanted to control the size of the levy.
Right.
We couldn't control the shift, but we could control the size of the levy and sort of take extraordinary measures to do that with things that probably wouldn't have been done in a normal budget year.
Right, correct.
Right. Yeah. Talk about that, Joe.
Well, I think that the shift was, something that you really can't control.
Right.
It's controlled by the market, and so that it's an equity issue of having everybody up to the 70, technically the 70% level, which really is a fairness issue across all taxpayers, and most people don't really think about that, or when they get the tax bill with an increase in their particular taxes, they don't understand that maybe someone else has been subsidizing their piece of it, and now it's coming back to them to kind of square off with really what the market has done for their particular property. That said, we've tried to say, we don't want to cut services, and so how do you find that balance between hopefully a relatively small amount of increase, even though for some people it was a large amount. I think and we also decided, as we have in the past, to do it in 1 year, so we don't phase in the reval.
Right.
The pain, you take it in 1 year and you try to work it out the best you can, knowing that in this next year coming up, people will have hopefully a modest increase, but it won't be that large increase that they experienced in the past.
Right.
But reval is, again, it's a state mandate, and
Yeah.
to some extent it's unfunded, just like many of the other types of, in particular, educational and environmental types of mandates that come down that we have to fund locally. I was reading this today in the Register, regarding, I think the CCM director was talking about having, trying to alert the state that, there's inequities. And Branford, many of them are created, when the real estate values change. But talking about the educational issues, and really, from my standpoint, going way back, was, I really think the educational should be funded 100% at the state level. And because they basically run it from the state and they tell you what to do. You have very little local control. The boards of ed are, they're subject to, very strict mandates from the state. And so that would be one way to kind of equalize things across the board. The state is to say, why should Branford be paying, because we get very little for our educational value, educational funding, that compared to a city or some other town.
Right.
Then
the formula works.
Right. Why not, if you really want to equalize it, then and make it less regressive, then push it up to the state level, that the state pay for it, and that way local property taxes would really pay for, the town
Your
functions,
municipal
which
services.
are municipal services. But I think politically, it's probably not doable.
Yeah.
But again, so that's really part of the finance job too, is to understand, not only the political side, try to stay out of it,
Sometimes,
but also, be aware of the dynamics, and there's only certain things that we can control. So you do the best you can.
Right.
just piggybacking on what Joe said about education, I think the structure doesn't really make any sense to me, because you have an independent governance structure, boards of eds, and this is just not a knock on any particular school district, and certainly not ours, but a dependent financial structure. So that really is always going to create issues. And I think to Joe's point, well, if you align the financial structure with the governance structure, then you probably it's probably worth considering.
Yeah.
I think what saves us also in this state is that we eliminated the county government. because in states like New York, you have a county government in addition to a town government and a state government. So,
right.
additional levels add to additional expenditures.
Right.
So, Jim brought up already the Coastal Resiliency Fund passed in 2019, an act authorizing municipal climate change and coastal resiliency reserve funds. And this has really put Branford on the map. How did you conceive of this? How did this come about?
Well, actually, it was kind of interesting because initially, and this might be a theme of sometimes converts make the best zealots, is initially I was reading a draft of the Plan of Conservation and Development. And there was a quote in there that basically, in so many words, said, the extent of this is going to be so great that really Branford is going to need a lot of help. And essentially, it was like kind of a gloom and doom. It was really like designed to say, it's almost impossible to deal with. And so, at the time, we were talking about Walsh coming up and other things. So I was concerned about that in a public document because while I didn't disagree with the premise of it, my concern was that was going to, hang us up with the rating agencies. Here you are admitting this. And then, I thought about it a little bit more, and I said, well, it's probably not really a gloom and doom. It's probably more of a acknowledgement and a call to action. And so I remember reading an article in 2018. It was Jan Ellen Spiegel, who writes for a variety of newspapers. The article was entitled "Connecticut's Vanishing Shoreline." And as I'm reading the article, there was a gentleman, Bruce Hyde, who works up at the state of Connecticut, and he said that basically, municipalities typically, are reluctant to fund things that will have a benefit in the future, in so many words. So, in other words, kicking the can down the road.
Right.
And when I read that, I was like, well, yeah, but that's not what we do here. That's true of pensions, that's true of OPEB, and that's true of deferred maintenance, but that's generally not something we do in Branford. So I thought, okay, well, if I frame this like a financial liability, at least conceptually, it would be difficult to measure, but at least conceptually, then I think you can make the case that anything that we do, whether it's protection, accommodation, or retreat, broadly defined are sort of the overall strategies when it comes to resiliency, that we should really start doing something. So I went down to Jamie's office, and Jamie had just been out somewhere where someone had complained about the water rising in an area. So at the same time, it's just kind of like, oh, you were thinking about this? I just came back from someplace. So I called Joe up and ran it by him. And so we went. So that would have been November of 2018. I think it was probably January 2019 or so. We presented it, and then I stumbled on this quote from Arthur Ashe, which was, "Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can." And so that seemed to be the right framework as opposed to the gloom and doom.
Right.
And bolster that with Branford's history of funding its liabilities. So if you kind of marry those two concepts, and I pretty much was looking at it from the financial aspect. I know at the RTM meeting, parts of it got almost into the debate whether I believe in sea level rise or not. And so I as you pointed out, sometimes there's a Jim Finchism. I think I said to this individual, I said, well, I don't know if the seas are rising or the land is sinking, but the result is the same, and we need to do something. So,
Right.
So that's kind of, so I kind of went from, dreading the statement in the POCD to sort of using it later and framing it as kind of a call to arms. And so I think that was sort of the transition. And again, it's a little slow to catch on in other communities, although some have done things. In terms of other organizations, there's an interest in it. I had a chance in July to be on a panel at the National Government Finance Officers Association conference in D.C. And so that was, again, talking about Branford. And afterwards, some of the panelists were saying that, there's a lot of tools out there that communities can use. And and this is one we haven't heard of. And so they were somewhat encouraged that when they go other places, they know that somewhere in New England there's a small town that's actually trying to do something. So
Yeah. No, it's a great, it's a wonderful ability to kind of, it's another sinking fund
our tool,
in a way.
our tool, yeah.
To be able to earn additional revenue, right? It can be invested, which is different than municipal funds.
Yes.
So that gives us some additional funding for, and we're going to need it, right? The
Yep.
sewage treatment plant, we're still trying to determine what's going to happen there, and that's going to be a big ticket item.
Yeah, and being able to invest it differently, that was the key part of the legislation working with Christine Cohen, because other than that, you'd pretty much be subject to, Statute 7400, which is basically the statute governing public deposits and municipal investments. So basically we made it similar to pension and OPEB in terms of being able to invest it. And I tell people that one way to think of this is to compare it to funding college, right? Your child's born and you say, wow, this is what a public college is going to cost. This is what a private college is going to cost. And
Eye-opening today.
Yeah, and in many ways, you could easily get discouraged, right?
Right.
And so, if you start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. If you were to draw a triangle on a piece of paper for college, you would say, okay, well, I have scholarships, and I have student loans, and I have a 529 plan, which is a college savings account that many states have adopted.
Right.
If you apply that same model to funding resiliency, okay, well, the grants could be FEMA, instead of scholarships. And instead of student loans, towns borrow money through the debt markets, which we talked about earlier. But there's not, the other side of the triangle never existed, so there wasn't that 529 piece. And so what this really does is it is like a 529 for resiliency. So to the average consumer, I would probably explain it that way.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. And that has grown. Now, what number are we up to?
Yeah, it's about $4 million now.
Right.
Yep.
So that's good.
Yep.
That's some insurance.
Yeah, I think we used the. Didn't we purchase one piece of property out of that fund?
That was discussed. It was not. It did not go
Did
through
that
the
ever-
RTM.
The RTM tanked that one.
We tanked it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah,
The
but
funds it was dipped into, right, to fund the study for the treatment plant.
yeah, and I think a
So-
little bit for the they call it the cow path, but what's the right name for that place?
The cattle crossing.
Yeah, the cattle
the
crossing.
cattle
crossing.
Yeah,
Cattle
yeah, yeah,
crossing.
whatever that is.
Yeah,
I
because
think
we
I
have
know what
so
it
much,
is, but what's
so
the
much
real name
cattle
of
in
it
our
is?
town these
Well,
days.
there was, I think, coming out of Sansone's farm, but more
Right.
than likely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yep.
Okay.
So fund balance
yeah,
standing at over $60 million. Last audit, 23-24, revealed an additional savings of, if I recall correctly, $8 million,
then yeah, we could
give or take.
sure.
So at one point, the Board of Finance did talk about establishing guidelines. Are we getting closer to having some kind of guideline there? I mean, it's not a bad thing to have that kind of reserves.
Yeah, I think that, like you say, it's something that most towns would be envious of.
Absolutely.
Either as a percentage of their balance sheet or a percentage of their budget. And, Branford has been fortunate to have, positive net results at the end of fiscal years for a very long time. That's been the trend and the historical record. And it's really made up of, revenues that come in higher than expected and expenditures that are lower than anticipated. And grants that may come in and such. Interest rates. There's a lot of variables that go into the forecasts. And then you have the issue of many factors, including the rating agencies who look across the country. It varies. There's other parts of the country that they expect to have way over 40% of the budget to be part of fund balance, and so the fund balance has grown, and Jim had provided a draft to myself and others some time ago that we're looking at, which would be a fund balance policy along with a debt service policy. So those kind of go hand in hand. And generally, we've always been watching the debt service percentage to try to keep that. There's times it was over, it was close to 11%. Now it's under 10%, if I'm not mistaken.
Not since I've been here, though.
11%.
I know it's usually about 8%, isn't it? That's kind of the sweet spot where you try to keep it 8%.
Well, yeah, other communities have 10, but we've been sort of managing to 8. But I'm sorry, did I?
No, I think there was a time it was 11%. I think that was a height, and I'm not sure what pushed it over, whether or not it was a school or a treatment plant or something. But but this Branford has increasingly always looked to, at one point in time we were small a. We had Standard & Poor's and Moody's and others and Finch. The rating agencies that were looked at it, and so and it was always the push was to increase, to try to get improve, if possible, improve the that credit rating because we were active in the market. We're an active borrower. We have a lot of projects, and we're always trying to improve the community. So the large fund balance has been our friend. And so, but recognizing that, there is your question, and it goes back, and I'll admit it, Dave Etzel Sr., who was a Board of Finance member under, during when I first started back in the 70s, and Bobby Geyer was chairman, and then Don Jackson was chairman after Bobby Geyer. But back then, Bob Geyer, Dave Etzel, Donnie Grigley, there was Perry Curtis. There was a really strong group on the Board of Finance, and Dave Etzel Sr. used to say, "You're overtaxing. You have too much fund balance. This is back in the 70s, okay, early 80s. So there's always been someone, that has looked at fund balance and say, why do you need it? Okay, why do you need such a strong fund balance? So then the question is what's the target? And
right.
And really, I would say that the target is somewhere 35 to 40%. At the draft that Jim pushed forward was a lot lower. I'm saying, well, you're not going to issue a refund check to taxpayers. There are options.
Although they might like that.
They might, but I think it may come from the state or the federal government if they have. So I think we stay out of that refund-ish side of it because we're continually looking at capital projects, whether or not it's schools. Over 200 million of school projects that are at least in conceptual design,
yes,
conceptual thought and such. The treatment plant, the public works, building,
right.
Others. So, a fire truck is over $1.5 million these days.
Yeah.
So there could be the concept would be to adopt a policy that makes sense, that has a target, and then also looks at if in fact we were above the target now, then how do you glide off of that so that in fact are you supporting the tax rate, or are you paying as you go? Are you assigning it for other contingencies down the road? So I think that conversation will happen. And again, it's not complex, but there's a lot of factors to it.
Right.
Yeah, that makes it very tricky. So
right.
And again, like I know Joe's looking at it again. I sent him something from Standard & Poor's from our financial advisor, and I think a lot of them were in that 41% range. So I think that was one of the things he was looking at. The other thing is it's I attribute it to mountain climbing. It's a little easier to walk up the mountain than down the mountain. There's more injuries by hikers actually on the descent than actually, if you say on the accumulation side. The other is, you mentioned the audit report, which is, I think, obviously a good starting point, but the audit report doesn't take into account the, all the assignments that, in February there was a lot of assignments of fund balance. You mentioned
right.
mentioned the $3 million earlier. Yep. Because it's a 24 audit, it doesn't have the reserve for future budgets to the same level of the 6.4 that was part of the 26 budget.
Right.
The other thing that's I've actually been interviewed on this by some investment firms is they're sort of looking at what are Branford's risks again. To oversimplify an example, and this is if the treatment plant. I think we've all mentioned this at some part of the conversation. is that, okay, well, if we had a stronger fund balance in, say, Cheshire or North Haven, which I'm almost certain we do, that, but what is their plant's risk? North Haven's is over by Universal Drive, and Cheshire's is certainly well inland. So there's certain aspects of that. Joe mentioned about the fund balance and the debt policy going hand in hand. The other thing is, the fund balance provides a measure of liquidity, which gives us some flexibility in terms of timing bond issues. So if you kind of look at that in relation to, say, the schools, for example, I think the school facilities report, one of the things they were looking at is, let's just call it $85 million for elementary schools. So that's so that's $170 million, and let's just call another 30 for the high school improvements. So now you're looking at $200 million, and that doesn't include the public works, which is being considered now, and we haven't financed the 11.5 that just got approved. And then you say to yourself, all right, well, there is let's try to get a better state reimbursement rate. That was something we identified when we were on the school facilities committee. We said, we can certainly try to work in collaboration with the state on that. And then the other is, okay, well, the state doesn't just turn around and you submit a grant form one day and you get your check the next day.
Right.
And so, you kind of have to cover your expenses, and then, because it's going to take you some time to get reimbursed. And so the fund balance does allow us to do that. And I think that'll be the
cushion.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the challenge. If I was here longer, I would model that a little bit more. I've done some that I'll pass on, certainly, but I think I would try to look at all of those things. And as Joe said, there's many moving parts to it. And, there's numbers and audits, but then there's also context and what are you doing with it? Probably, somebody in the private sector, you might say, well, how are you going to allocate your capital? And I think it kind of comes down. It kind of comes down to that too. So.
Right. But one of the things we do on the representative town meeting, which I serve on, is approve bonding resolutions. So you mentioned about the $11 million for the potential purchase of the Freightliner property. RTM considered it this week at our first official meeting and deferred it for another month because the first selectman asked to be given more time to feel more comfortable and do a little more due diligence. So that is something that is in the offing, but I know that's a priority because it's been a long time since DPW had their own place.
And that's where Jim had mentioned it's for us to either enter into contracts or to expend money, we need the appropriation. So and then by having, again, a strong fund balance, it gives flexibility to say, well, I don't have to go out into the market for whatever reason, whether or not the rates aren't attractive or there's other factors there that you say, well, I'm going to wait 6 months or I'm going to wait a year, but the project can still move forward because you have the authorization to spend, and then you can borrow when the timing is right. So it gives us, again, as Jim pointed out, more flexibility in cash flow because we have the cash.
Yeah, we can go to the closing.
Yeah. and
with cash in hand.
Yes.
If we pay cash, do we get a discount?
Yeah. Well,
it doesn't work that way necessarily.
Yeah, only on part. Yeah, well, yeah, because the seller really doesn't care if you borrowed for the money or not.
Right.
This is true.
So
they just want the
discount. Yeah.
Yes.
If they were financing it, they might.
Right. But for instance, the animal shelter, we
Yes.
did a bond allocation for that,
Right.
bonding resolution. But the town never went to bond for it, right? It was kind of a pay as you go.
Well, that's a little bit tricky.
Okay.
So basically what the town had done is because we had bonded for other projects and those other projects didn't really didn't get started. And so not to try to get too much into the weeds, but because the town borrows at tax-exempt rates, you're discouraged from issuing tax-exempt debt and not spending it. And so we felt that, there could be some possible repercussions of that And so what the Board of Finance and the RTM did is they transferred proceeds from a couple projects, but largely the East Industrial Road project, because that was still, kind of on hold, to the animal shelter. So there, and so we didn't have to do a bond issue for the animal shelter because that was part of the timing. We thought we did, but because we did that, basically filled the gap. And of course, the animal shelter also had, was a very aggressive and active fundraising.
Yes.
We also did take
Right.
some money out of the town's general fund balance. I think it was $650,000. I think there was maybe $100,000 from the animal control fund. So it was bond proceeds, but we didn't directly bond for that. That was a reallocation of proceeds. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is also that the municipal finance has gotten much more complicated over the years. Just a little bit of history back in they changed the majority of the laws in 1986. Substantial change. Prior to that, we were able to actually borrow early and then invest. At market rates, and so at the time, and we did that pretty aggressively back in the, as I say, early '80s for some of these projects, but the interest that was earned, and it was that was the arbitrage, the interest that was earned, we were able to keep, and we'd put it against the project, so it actually reduced the project costs. But because, like many times, there's issues across the country, they change the laws, and the guys that are the towns that are municipalities or governments that are doing things well get pulled into those
Right.
changes in law. So then we weren't able to do that. Now it's very strict about the arbitrage, when you can borrow money at what rates, and when you spend it, and how you spend it, and how you reimburse yourself. So it's much more complicated. But again, we have a very good finance team. We're going to miss Jim. And knowing that he was well deserved after many, many years.
Yes.
Almost
Public-
28, yeah.
Yeah.
Public service.
Well, that's just in Branford.
in
yeah.
Branford. I was
Just
saying
in
that
Branford,
when
right.
I first met Jim, he was down in Norwalk working, I think, for Jack Miller in the finance department there, and then you were in the city of New Haven for a while.
Actually, the opposite order. But yeah, I actually met Joe. Actually, at it was kind of a funny story. You might remember the event, not that because Joe and I were there, but other things. So Joe and I, along with Ruth Levine,
Yes. Yeah.
we actually were invited to go to the Volvo tennis tournament.
Oh,
the time.
yes.
Yeah.
And so we go. That's how we all got to know each other. But they didn't end up having a tournament because they had the issue. And then Stefano brought the helicopter in, trying to dry the court off, the tennis court off.
Yeah.
So basically, we went and we didn't end up really seeing any tennis.
Right.
That I think you were at Children and Family Service. No, where were you at?
DCYF.
DCYF.
Yeah.
And then I went down to Norwalk. Joe mentioned Jack Miller, who was a well-known finance director in Norwalk, and certainly within the state as well. And so, I was budget director in Norwalk for about 5 years, and then came to Branford. Ankh DeRoss was looking for a finance director, and I remember getting asked a lot of questions in an interview, and the internet really wasn't that popular back then, so you had to go to like Blackstone Library and kind of read newspaper articles and read the town audit.
Right.
So Ankh and Priscilla Bolak, HR director at the time, would ask me a bunch of questions that some of them were specific to Branford. So fortunately, I'd gone to the library in preparation, and so Ankh was mentioning how he was new at this, and I had never been a finance director before, a budget director, and then worked in a treasurer's office in New Haven. So I basically said to him at the time, I said, if you're willing to grow with me, I'm willing to grow with you. And so that's kind of how I left the interview. You got any closing remarks? So then he asked me one more question. He said, well, when do you think you'd be able to start? And I said, in fairness to my current employer, I would probably in my position, I'd probably give 4 weeks notice. And I found out later that he said to Priscilla if he's willing to be that loyal and good to his former employer, he's probably going to be good to us. And so it was kind of
Yeah.
so it was
So that was a fairly easy interview, though, right?
Well, that was the end of it. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of other.
That sealed the deal.
There was other questions, that,
So did they ask you about bond rates and
Yeah.
interest rates?
Well,
and all that
not
sort of
not. They just said borrowing because I think they still had some unfinanced high school pieces at the time.
yeah.
And the other thing is, it's funny because like when you're trying to move up in your career, I was exposed to a lot of things and knew how they worked, but I didn't do them directly. So, I knew how the pensions worked, but I wasn't on the pension board. And, I wasn't doing that in Norwalk, but certainly funding it, but not meeting with the pension board. So there were different things where you had to kind of say, okay, yep, I know how this works. It does this. There's evaluation. Evaluation determines what your funding ratio is, how much you need to put in every. So I knew it from like I could answer test questions on it, but I didn't do it directly. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. So a learning experience.
yeah.
But what made you stay for as long as you did? Because isn't that unusual to have someone stay in the same position in a town?
Yeah. Based on my experience with my peers and conversations, I think Lonnie had asked a similar question, and I mean this sincerely. I feel very blessed. In some ways, I think that my what drives me and kind of my purpose is very much manifest in what I was able to do. So I always kind of had a view that finance could actually empower a community to do certain things, and was given that opportunity and had some early successes in the career, which I think helped lead to the other successes because I think, people trusted some of the things, whether it was getting the bond rating up. And so I think if you're working at a place where you have good relationships with your bosses, you have good relationships with the folks in the community, and you're able to do good things, or at least, hopefully history will bear this out, but able to do good things for the community. I think, one, professionally, it makes you feel good, and psychologically, it makes you feel good. And so I think that it was really a good fit for both sides. And so, I didn't want to really screw it up and go somewhere else, even if the grass might have seemed greener at the time. So, I've been, like I said, I think blessed is probably the right word. And I'm grateful for the years I've been here. I said many years ago, and it's true today, I said, there's no one on any board or commission over the years that if they were walking down the sidewalk in the distance and I saw them before they saw me, there's no one I would cross the street to avoid. So
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
So
Well, not to get corny, but I think you feel blessed. I think we've been blessed too. So it's been very fortunate to have you on working for the town and be part of the town. And
Agreed.
And so well deserved retirement and
Definitely.
whatever else you wish to do.
well, thank you both.
Yes. Yeah. Any parting thoughts? Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I'm glad that that the town hired my assistant, Catherine LaBanca. I think she's very bright, and I think she is, looking to do a good job. I think it's going to be overwhelming for her at first, given what the task is, and then also adjusting to a new administration. She's been more involved with the Board of Education than we have been in, or more so the last couple of years than in other years. So I think that's been kind of a challenge. The audit environment is getting trickier, and so that's something as well. But I would ask that the community give her that support so that she continues to feel valued and continues to want to do a good job for the town. I think that the town has the right recipe. I think that in terms of has strong finances, despite the politics. I mean, ultimately, everything generally gets to where it needs to be eventually, and maybe there's a bump in the road occasionally. It's maybe a bad analogy, but I sometimes see it like, you're going on vacation and you drive for an hour, then you realize you forgot your wallet. And so you have to go back, and now you lost basically, 3 hours. Hour there, hour back, another hour to get to where you were.
Right.
But I think most of us, even in that scenario, once we get to our destination and midweek into your vacation, or if not, maybe the second day, if you got to where you were supposed to be, the fact that maybe you forgot your wallet along the way really isn't important. And I think that sometimes the squabbles along the way are kind of like the forgetting your wallet thing, because I think ultimately the town ends up in the right place. My sense is that most of the boards and commissions, and including the RTM and Board of Finance, I think they all want to do the right thing. And I think that most of the time they get there. And sometimes not always immediately. I know that I'll give an example of the pension change a couple of years back was, the thinking was that that was a good idea to go to a DC plan for the police, but things changed at the state level, which made that a little bit of a disincentive, and we brought back a second-tier plan, and that was something that I had looked at probably 3 years before that actually happened, but I just kept it in the back of my mind, and when the conditions were right, it happened. So again, I think Branford does have the right recipe, and I've seen that recipe basically work for various administrations. And again, so the future administrations and future leaders will have to make sure that they to some extent follow the recipe, and if they're going to change it, maybe just either add a little spice or take away a little spice, but don't fundamentally change the recipe.
Right.
And I think if they could do that, the town will still be do well. I do think that in some ways, I like to say this: what's can be aspirational can be achievable in Branford if everybody kind of works together and understands everybody's position and framework. And I think the potential for Branford, despite the challenges that are out there, and there are many, is still very positive. If Branford was a stock, I'd buy it.
I like that one.
That's a good plug.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. This has been a great discussion, and we will all miss you, Jim. Thank you for
thank you,
your
Tracy.
many
Appreciate
years
it.
of service to our town. And Joe Mooney is sticking around for another 3 years on the Board of Finance, so
Yes.
he'll still be in place there. So thank you both.
All right. You're welcome.
All right.
And enjoy your retirement, Jim. We will
Yes,
miss you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, like I said, I'm going to miss Branford. It's going to be hard walking out that last day. It really is. I may have to wear the sunglasses that day.
You can come back and visit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the same though, right?
No, it's not the same.
Yeah, it's
this
like-
is true. Never go back.
Yeah, it's like showing up at a high school football game when you're in college. You're like, that's not the same. Your first year in college,
This
you
is
go
true.
back to your high school
This
game
is
or
true.
something. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you again.
All right, thank you, Tracy.
And that's this edition of Branford Voices. I'm Tracy Everson. We'll see you on the next podcast. Take care.